It's finally the final interview. However, the interviewer in charge tore up my resume right in front of me, saying, "Who would hire such a bottom-tier ex-janitor?"
If there's someone willing to hire a bottom tire like you, please let me know. I'll call them here.
But this interviewer still doesn't know. Understood. I'll call them then.
What?
Mom, can you come to the interview venue? The interviewer is calling. My parents, who they are. My name is Max Johnson. I'm a 24-year-old part-time worker who works as a janitor during the day while attending night classes at college. I'm not exactly poor, but when I was 20, my parents divorced, saying they wanted to pursue their passions without being tied down by a family. Since then, it's been just me and my dad. Even though my dad has had many business trips, even now he travels around the world. Thanks to their amicable divorce, my parents are still on good terms, and I know they will stay in touch. I also have a good relationship with my mother, even though we don't live together. The reason I've been working as a part-time worker without a regular job until this age is that I had a strong desire to travel not only in this country, but all around the world. My father has been working a job that involves traveling abroad since a long time ago, which naturally sparked my interest in foreign countries from a young age. There are still so many things I don't know about the world. It's something I can never truly understand just by watching TV, reading magazines, or browsing the internet. I want to go there in person. I want to see it with my own eyes and feel it with my own skin. With that in mind, during my high school years, I used my long vacations to visit my father's location and explore various tourist attractions, and even some off-the-beaten-path places. During that time, I got hooked on traveling abroad, and right after high school, I accompanied my father on his overseas business trips. I also started remote work during that time. When I returned to my country, I took up a job as a janitor while traveling within the country during my days off. It's gotten to the point where it's harder to find places I haven't been to than places I have. I'm grateful to my parents for giving me experiences that I couldn't have had anywhere else. And I'm still working as a part-time worker to this day. One day, when I told my mother, "I think there's no place where I've never been in this country anymore," she suggested, "Well, maybe it's time to try being a full-time worker." It's true that I've traveled all around the world, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I've conquered the US as well. Most people of my generation have regular jobs and are working, and I've also been thinking about becoming an office worker eventually. So it seemed like good timing. However, with no real work experience and not even being able to fill out a proper resume, I wondered if there was any company that would hire me. While I was thinking about this, my mother introduced me to a certain trading company, and I ended up having an interview. They had already hired me as a remote worker, so the interview was more of a formality for converting me into a regular worker. Although I had been working as a part-time worker, it was my first time setting foot in this company, and I was a bit nervous. It was an interview for a well-respected major corporation that everyone admires, so even if it was just a formality, I felt a sense of tension. I've been introduced by my mom, so I shouldn't get too complacent. I quietly motivated myself as I walked into the venue. When I was called in and entered the room, there were 3 interviewers sitting across a long table. There was an elderly man, a middle-aged woman, and a petite woman.
Please have a seat.
Thank you. I took a seat on a pipe chair, and the 3 of them introduced themselves in order as Brown, Garcia, and Miller. After shaking hands and saying, "Nice to meet you," we began with the formal self-introductions. When it was over, the atmosphere changed drastically.
Well, your highest level of education is high school, and you're now working as a part-time worker.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Johnson, didn't you go to college?
After graduating from high school, I went to live with my father overseas, so I didn't pursue further education and instead got part-time jobs.
I see. It says part-time work here too. Was it all remote work, then?
Yes, that's correct. I didn't work outside. I received work orders from your company and completed them from home.
I see.
It was tense, and Brown and Garcia exchanged glances, forcing smiles and sighing.
What kind of work did you do remotely?
Yes, I mainly did translation work for data written in foreign languages.
Translation. Huh? Well, your father actually works overseas, and they say translation apps have improved quite a bit now.
What?
Oh, never mind. I was talking about something else.
What did she just say? Don't mean to brag, but I've received high praise for my performance as a part-time worker, and I've been entrusted with one job after another. But they think I use a translation app. Do they think my father does the translation for me? Am I being misunderstood?
3 years of remote part-time work overseas, and 3 years since returning to this country. It's been all remote work, right? Have you ever worked in the office?
No, I haven't. I originally worked remotely, so there was no need to come to the office.
So, is it that a shut-in has finally decided to enter society?
For a moment, I didn't understand what they were saying.
Well, that's right. I mean, 6 years of remote part-time work is not much different from being a shut-in.
That's right, and that part-time job seems quite suspicious. Translation work can now be done by machines to some extent. Maybe you only worked a few hours a week.
Brown and Garcia ridiculed me, making fun of me together.
Besides, he also has a job as a janitor in this country. That's quite a low-level job, isn't it?
Indeed. It's the perfect job for a shut-in. A decent person wouldn't do such work.
They pointed at my resume, laughed, looked at my face, and smirked at each other. Well, it's true that I've only done remote work other than being a janitor, but I have extensive experience living abroad, and I'm confident in my language skills. I handle all the translation work myself.
Speaking of experience living abroad, you're just a shut-in. Even if you're confident in your language skills, well, there are students around who have studied abroad and speak fluently. That alone isn't enough.
Their condescending attitude was getting to me, and my head was starting to hurt. The other petite woman, Miller, seemed to be focused on taking notes and didn't stop them or react in any way. What's going on? Wasn't this supposed to be a formality one? I was desperately trying to endure my anger.
Someone please tell me if they'd hire someone like this. Acting all high and mighty just because your parent had a little overseas assignment. Well, I'd love to see your parents.
You're absolutely right. Do you even know the competition ratio for our company's entrance exam? There's no way they'd reserve a spot for a bottom-tier candidate like you.
Brown said this as he playfully shook my resume, and Garcia agreed, tearing it up with enthusiasm. As I witnessed this, something inside me snapped. You want to see my parents?
Yeah, I bet you're curious. I mean, how can you even submit such a blank resume? No qualifications, no educational background. Do you take pride in your language skills? Well, that's up for debate too. I'd really like to know what kind of education you've had.
Well,
It's clear that having a single parent is a disadvantage. No matter how much overseas experience you have, you're still nothing more than a bottom feeder.
unable to endure their conversation any longer, I said, "Excuse me, may I say something?"
What can I help you with? Are you leaving?
No way. We haven't finished the interview yet.
Ah. Facing the two mocking individuals once again, I took a deep breath before speaking. You mentioned wanting to see my parents. Well, my mother actually works at this company. Can I call her here now?
Well, technically, it should be the father, right? But either is fine. If it allows us to see their face, we grant permission. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I took out my smartphone from my bag and called my mother. Meanwhile, Brown and Garcia continued to smirk, making me feel disgusting. My mother picked up after 2 rings, and I put the call on speaker. Mom, sorry for bothering you, but could you come to the meeting room where I'm having an interview?
Is something wrong? I'll be right there. Just wait a moment.
As soon as they heard my mother's voice, Brown and Garcia frowned.
Wait, did you just hear that voice?
No way, right?
Ignoring the bewildered pair, Miller calmly got up and began preparing tea. And a few minutes later, as the meeting room door opened and a woman appeared, Brown and Garcia hastily stood up with surprised face.
President.
Excuse me for asking, but what are you doing here?
Hey, good job, everyone. How did the interview go?
It went smoothly.
I see. Miller, please report.
Yes.
Miller, who hadn't uttered a word until now, provided a brief report on the interview.
I see. So that's why I was called in.
What?
Max, I'm sorry for being late.
No, it's fine. As the two of us engaged in conversation, Brown and Garcia, who were comparing us, seemed to grow paler and paler.
Nice to meet you. I'm the mother of the bottom tire guy, Ava Taylor, who you two were just talking about.
Smiling at the two, my mother, in fact, is the president of this company.
You wanted to see my face, didn't you? But you two already saw it in yesterday's web conference, didn't you? Is it not enough yet?
What?
No way.
Facing the two who were gaping like fish out of water, my mother delivered the final blow.
I encouraged him to take up remote work so he could freely travel overseas because I was delighted that he developed an interest in the world.
After graduating from high school, when my mother found out that I was going to follow my father, she was delighted. She immediately arranged remote work for me, saying, "With remote work, you can do your job from anywhere in the world, so you can enjoy traveling to your heart's content. Go explore the world and broaden your horizons as much as you want." The reason I returned to this country was that my father asked me to support my mother since he was staying in China. The reason I took up the job of a janitor was that I was surprised and became interested in the cleanliness of Japanese offices when I traveled, and which was different from overseas. I wanted to know how they managed to keep the offices so clean, and it also offered relatively flexible hours, which worked out well for me.
Also, it seems like you doubt my son's language abilities, but his father is Chinese. My son is trilingual, proficient in English, Chinese, and Japanese.
Trilingual?
My son does most of the translation work for our company's reports coming from overseas branches. The report from the Chinese branch that you saw during yesterday's meeting, it was translated by my son. Are you suggesting that he used a translation app for that? Are you mocking my decision to recommend him?
Yo, we didn't mean to.
Under my mother's intimidating presence, the two of them had completely lost their words. When my mother's anger subsided a bit, Brown and Garcia, for some reason, started directing their anger towards Miller.
Did you know?
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. You knew this guy is the president's son, didn't you?
It's hard to believe you, the president's secretary, didn't know about the boss's son.
Yes, of course, I knew him. However, I was instructed not to interfere with the president's affairs.
What did you say?
Such a conversation only further fueled my mother's anger.
At first, my intention was to make it just a formality and let you conduct a superficial interview.
Then why?
But then I noticed something strange when you two conducted the interviews. The number of candidates being hired was extremely low. When I had Miller bring the resumes from that time, I found several highly talented individuals who had been rejected. It seemed very suspicious.
Well, it's because.
That's why I'm sorry, but I had Miller join as the recorder, partly for monitoring purposes. Miller also has a voice recorder hidden on her, so I'm looking forward to listening to it later.
President, that was a rather harsh situation, so please be careful when you listen to it.
Thank you.
Wait.
President, this is...
What? Is there any problem?
Seeing the pale faces of the two when she received the voice recorder from Miller, my mother smiled.
In any case, I'll take this matter seriously. We'll discuss your punishment later. Be prepared for it. Miller, may I ask you to see off my son?
Of course.
Max, I'm sorry for not informing you and using you like this.
Well, if that's the case, you can't help it. Thanks for coming.
Oh, you don't need to thank me.
I watched my mother leave with a kind smile, and then, guided by Miller, I headed to the office entrance. When I left the room, the last image I saw of Brown and Garcia was them kneeling there, in a state of shock. 1 month later, I went through another interview which was also a formality one, and I passed successfully. I started my life as a company employee for the first time. My mother was amazed, but I wanted to understand the company from the inside, so I chose to start as a janitor. Balancing work and evening classes was challenging, but I found it enjoyable with plenty of new things to learn. When I asked my mother why she had encouraged me to become a regular employee, she said with a childlike, innocent smile, "I've always wanted you to be my successor. I thought that if I didn't act now, you might set off somewhere again soon 'cause you love traveling. I felt it was now or never. After that interview, Brown and Garcia were both dismissed from their positions due to disciplinary action. It turned out that the two of them had conspired together to reject overly talented candidates, those with single parents or undesirable educational backgrounds, and students who posed a threat to their positions in the company. They used abusive language during interviews and even engaged in coercive interviews, which is quite rare nowadays. Furthermore, as investigations continued, it was revealed that the two of them were involved in an extramarital affair, and they had also embezzled a small amount of money. Video evidence from surveillance cameras confirmed their actions, leaving them with no room for denial. My mother expressed her regret, saying, "As the president, it's shameful that I didn't notice this wrongdoings earlier. From now on, I'll pay closer attention to each and every employee." A year has passed since I became a regular employee. By this time, my business trips under the guise of inspections had increased. My company had branches throughout the US and overseas, which allowed me to travel the world once again. The perspective of the world during business trips was entirely different from that of leisure travel, and I found it exciting and fascinating. I never expected that I would continue traveling the world even after starting my career, so I am truly grateful to my mother. My father even said, "If you ever come to China, let's have a meal together," and I'm looking forward to that as well. While conducting inspections in parallel, I continued my translation work as before. Additionally, I started providing monthly language training sessions within the company, and I was entrusted with the role of the instructor. Occasionally, I still took on cleaning duties, and since graduating from night school, I had seriously begun studying business management. This made my days even busier and more hectic, but I found them fulfilling and satisfying. Several years later, I was promoted to vice president of the company. I had risen to the level of my mother as equals. Of course, I was still far from being a seasoned business leader, and I felt that catching up with my mother was an impossible task. However, my mother smiled at the people involved and said, "Starting next year, I plan to entrust the position of president to my son." I found myself filled with trepidation every day. "Mom, becoming the president is impossible for me. I still have a lot to learn, and I don't have the trust of the employees. It's too much of a burden." I burst into the president's office, and my mother responded, feigning innocence, "Oh, is that so?"
I think it's really good thing. You gain experience of everything when you're young. Trust from the employees isn't something that increases in a day. You earn it little by little. But now isn't the time for that. You'll build it up through your work as the president.
But
everyone feels uncertain at first. I did too. But a company isn't something you run alone. When you become president, there will be times when you're unsure for a while. In those times, consult with those around you. Rely on them. Even if the results seem wrong, believe in yourself and the people around you. If you do that, you'll naturally become a good president without even realizing it.
Mom,
I'm looking forward to seeing a splendid president in you, Max.
inspired by my mother's words, I reflected on my tumultuous life so far and managed to motivate myself. When I thought about becoming the president, I realized how narrow my perspective had been due to the pressure. All right, I'll do my best in my own way.
Yes, I'm rooting for you.
It seems that from the next season, Miller will become my exclusive secretary, which is reassuring. I'll support you with all my might, so please don't worry, Miller said, and I felt a bit relieved, although I kept it a secret from my mother. After passing on the role of president to me, my mother plans to go to China. It seems my father has bought an apartment in Shanghai, and he invited her to live there together. My mother, perhaps out of embarrassment, said, I thought, why not go along with it? But when I saw her happy expression, I couldn't help but nod eagerly. After retiring as president, my mother will take on the title of chairman, but she said, I want to see the world and experience it like my son does. I plan to engrave in my memory the world that both of you found so captivating. So even if some troubles happened, please don't call me back too often, and she laughed. It seems she envied me, as she watched me traveling around the world, reporting happily with souvenirs and photos, and wished to embark on a world tour herself someday. Looking forward to my mother's stories from her travels, I decided to send her off.
President, about tomorrow's schedule.
Yeah, sure.
Also, could you please review these documents?
Understood. Since becoming the president, I have been working tirelessly every day. However, recently, I have been feeling a certain change within myself.
President, is something bothering you?
Oh, no. It's nothing. Just get back to work.
Understood.
As Miller returned to the secretary's office, I sighed. For quite some time now, my gaze had been involuntarily following Miller. Initially, she had been a reliable support to me when I first became the president. That hadn't changed. However, a different feeling had started to grow inside me. I wasn't sure how Miller felt about it, but I believed she didn't dislike me. Or at least, I hoped so. It was a professional relationship, and I hadn't conveyed my feelings. But lately, I have been feeling frustrated about it. One day, my mother suddenly returned and visited the company.
Max, long time no see.
Mom, what brings you here all of a sudden?
Well, you know, your father said he's on a business trip to the US, so I decided to come along.
I see. So, Dad is in here today.
Yes, he is. How about the three of us have a meal together?
Sure. As I engaged in a lively conversation with my enthusiastic mother, Miller, who had prepared tea, entered from behind.
Please have a seat here.
Oh, Miller, thank you.
Not at all. There are no urgent matters for now, President, so please take your time.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Miller served tea for me and my mother, and then smiled kindly before returning to the secretary's office. Observing us, my mother's expression loosened into a sly smile.
Hey, is there something going on between you and Miller? When did that happen?
Well, it's not really like that.
Even if you say that with such a bright red face, it's not very convincing.
For some reason, my mother seemed to have noticed.
Miller doesn't seem entirely uninterested either. It's fine.
What? She nodded and then clapped her hands together and approached me.
It's fine. You two look great together. I'd be so happy if you both got together.
No, I mean,
Just let me talk to her for a bit.
Mom, my mother headed towards the secretary's office, bringing Miller along.
Do you have someone special? What do you think about Max?
Huh? What are you?
Don't hold back. I think of you as my own daughter. I'd be overjoyed if you two got together.
Sorry, my mother is just going off on her own. Despite my immediate apology, Miller also blushed as she looked at me. Though she could refuse, said, "Give me some time."
Understood. Max, do your best.
It's really enough already, so please stop. I sighed in frustration at my mother's interference. But my heart raced because Miller didn't refuse. Perhaps there's hope for me too. Thinking that, I became even more aware of it and felt flustered. I wonder if Miller felt something similar. The awkward atmosphere was frustrating, and a few days later, I confessed and we started dating. Of course, we are in a romantic relationship, but also president and exclusive secretary at the same time. Mixing business with personal matters wouldn't be good. So we separated work and personal life in our minds, and not much progress had been made. However, we went on dates and traveled together on our days off. It turned out that Miller had experience traveling abroad, and travel was a shared hobby. We looked forward to the time we spent together, thinking about where to go next on our days off more than anything else, and I wanted to be with her all the time. Miller,
President, what's wrong?
well, today is your birthday, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But
One day, after work, I nervously called her and took out a small box.
what is this?
Seeing the box, she seemed to understand what was about to be said and swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at me. Though my heart felt like it might burst from nervousness, I took a deep breath and spoke. I'm still immature, but I promise to make you happy. Would you marry me? As I presented the large diamond ring inside, she gently enveloped it with both her hands and said, "Yes, of course." I felt relieved and started to cry
Why are you crying, Max?
because I'm just so relieved. Thank you. And so, we officially became engaged. We decided to get married within the year and hold our wedding ceremony overseas next year. With our busy jobs, and now as an engaged couple, we couldn't travel around the world like we used to, but we found even greater happiness and fulfillment. Gazed at a photo of themselves, smiling on a postcard sent by my parents. Although they hadn't remarried, seeing my parents enjoying their retirement years together freely and lovingly made me think, we want to become a couple like them. With that goal in mind, we will continue to work hard together